Well, hi, friends. This is Trish Murray, and this is the New Age Tour Guide podcast. This podcast is really designed for soul seekers who are shifting their minds and preparing their hearts and using their soul's wisdom to navigate these age-changing times. Now, in this episode, I'm going to unpack what I found at the bottom of one of a million rabbit holes, specifically the prophets and the prophecies that have led me to believe now that we are moving into a new age. A new age. This is shorthand for how I describe what I see transpiring when I look at the world around us and I understand personally what I've experienced in my own corner of the world. Now, I think it's fair to say that if you are not seeing anything unusual, if you are looking at the world and thinking, oh, it's just business as usual, it's just life, it's just the way things are, then this podcast isn't going to really resonate with you. But if you are seeing things and if you are questioning what's going on around, the world right now and struggling to make sense of it, you might really enjoy this episode. I want to put this conversation out as soon as possible in this season because as I've been searching for a beginning point, I really came to realize that my very first red pill, if you will, came way back in 1996 when I got my hands on a copy of the Celestine Prophecy. Now, I can't say that the fullness of all that James Redfield presented in this modern day parable really landed for me in 96, but there were pieces that popped up over and over and over again as I continued on my path. What's even more interesting, though, now, having done a second reading of this book, is that I've found that the vast majority of the ideas and the concepts that James Redfield shares in this book, in the first book, The Celestine Prophecy, were repeated in what I learned during my degree studies in psychology, as I trained in yoga therapy, as I learned to work with things like Reiki and the Akashic Records. I also found direct parallels to the Christian Bible. And a lot of his thinking really has started to come through the version of human design that I engage with. So as we prepare to shift from the video portion of this podcast into the audio segment, I want to invite you to start tuning in. I want to invite you to start tuning in to what you need to hear today in order to shift your mind, prepare your heart, and listen for what your soul's wisdom might have to share with you as it relates to the prophets and the prophecies and navigating these age-changing times. Now, in one of the introduction episodes, I shared a quote from Dolores Cannon, which said, "If it's your calling, it keeps calling." I think this is true both on an individual level as well as on a collective level. We each came here into this lifetime with a calling, with a purpose, a mission, maybe even. And I'll bring this back a number more times because I think it's really important to how we're moving into this quote new age. But I also believe that humanity on a whole is being called. The collective, the people of Earth, regardless of race, culture, sex, occupation, the collective is being called to evolve, to transform, to let go of some things and to lean in to some things. The collective has been repeatedly and consciously called throughout history, and it's my personal belief that the prophets and the prophecies throughout all of human history were stewards of the divine, God, source, spirit, whatever language you use. The prophets and the prophecies were stewards acting in the 3D world to call us forward. And where we are today is no different. The divine God, source, spirit is moving through the 3D world. It's moving through the material world. It's moving through human beings. It's bringing intel and insights and ideas through the 3D world, the material world, through human beings that are designed to make us ready for this new age, to prepare us and to help us plan for how we will step into this new age. So here's a question to ask at this moment in time. How are you feeling? Are you feeling ready? Probably how you answer that will depend on how far you've stepped off of the mainstream, how divergent you've become, and how in tune with spirit and your soul you are. So let's start with the first prophecy. The Celestine Prophecy was released in 1993 by James Redfield. Now, I know I'm not the only one who's deeply impacted by James Redfield's words and his vision, which he shared through the original 9 insights. Each of the insights became very real for me, working with the energy and how it shows up in our day-to-day exchanges, clearing out the past emotional content from our journey in order to engage with the creative flow more consistently. Of course, encountering synchronicities and finding other people who are talking about elements of the emerging culture that Redfield described. Now, if you haven't read this series, I don't want to give much away because it's a really good book series to read, and I strongly suggest it as a starting point. The number of people that I know who have read this book and are also seeing glimpses of what I'm seeing or fuller pictures of what I'm seeing had this book as a part of their journey. One of the most potent things that Redfield says in one of these books really shines a light on what I believe now is behind the shift into the new age. He says something to the effect, and I'm going to paraphrase, but I'll go back and find his original words in a later podcast. But paraphrased, what I think he's saying is that this is about seeing ourselves as spiritual beings having a psychological journey. Now, like I said, I'm going to circle back to this in the future, specifically look for a segment called All of Life is a PSYOP. Redfield found a really cool way to shine light on the fact that all of life is a spiritual and a psychological journey. And it's very likely that the vast majority of us are trying to navigate this without any foundational understanding around the spiritual or the psychological nature of the journey. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Celestine Prophecy answers all the questions, that it paints a perfectly accurate picture, or that it provides all the tools that we'll need to make our way forward. I'm suggesting that it is a starting point. It's a beginning to unlearning what we have learned by being so immersed in a culture of skepticism when it comes to the mysterious nature of the universe, of nature, and ourselves. Prophecy number 2 came through Greg Braden, and it came from the Hopi Elders. After returning from Africa in 2007, I really began to feel things shifting in my world, which led to an exit from one life and into the recreation of another. This exit was reinforced by this prophecy from the Hopi Elders. And I'll put a link below to the video where Braden shares the prophecy, and I'll let you contemplate what it means to you. But for me, this story resonated very deeply, in part because I could never make peace with the idea that our culture is naturally wired for competition. As I worked through the prophets and the prophecies, I started to connect the dots. And I found that when you take it all back to ground zero, all 3 of these things, competition, conflict, and scarcity, have been manufactured and marketed as natural to life on planet Earth. The prophecy reinforced what I had already intuitively been feeling that, real or not real, the time of competition, conflict, and scarcity was coming to an end, and that those who will thrive in the new world will do so because they learned or relearned how to operate from contribution, cooperation, and community. Prophecy number 3, the Book of Revelations from the Christian tradition. Now, most of us, whether we're religious or not, or whether this is a religious tradition or not, have some pieces of this story. 4 horsemen, tests, plagues, famine. The Book of Revelation, for me, is basically saying the clock is ticking on how things have been done on the planet. It's probably one of the most challenging books that I've read and reread because it has such deep symbolism. And I don't know that I've found anyone who has been truly able to fully and correctly interpret it. The book does make it pretty clear that there is a battle underway and there are forces of good and forces of evil, the latter of which are putting tremendous pressure on every aspect of our world, which is creating an unprecedented level of chaos and confusion. Now, I mentioned in a previous segment that there are 7 core categories that I personally believe are going to go through a major transformation. And I would like for you to consider what you're seeing happening right now. I'll touch back on this at the end of this podcast. But to be able to look at those material pieces, those pieces that you're seeing in the material world through the lens of the Book of Revelations, the chaos, the confusion, and this battle for good to prevail. This book also helps make a case for the idea that this shift into the new age is an all play, like in Trivial Pursuit. It's up to all of us to choose based on what is in the highest interest of future generations. Are we acting and choosing in alignment with what we want our children, our grandchildren, and our grandchildren's children to experience in their lives? And are we casting a vision for ourselves and for them of what kind of world we want to leave behind? It reminds us that one of the greatest gifts that God gave to humanity is free will. We have both the ability and the cognition to choose. Prophecy number 4, the year 2027 and human design. Now, this is one I'm still working on in order to better articulate what has been shared around this so far. But the initial pieces that I can offer is that, according to the original steward of human design, Ra Uru Hu, 2027 marks a turning point that involves the integration of the spiritual with the material. Like I said, I'll come back to more on that in a later segment. Now, there have been other sources and other pieces that have added to this foundation and filled in the gaps. Voices that have used language like the Age of Awareness, the Great Awakening, and Ascension, which I will again touch into in future segments. But for now, the real question is this. As you look out into the world, what are you seeing? What are you experiencing? And do they align with any of the pieces from the prophets and the prophecies that I've come across, and maybe others that you've found? Now, if you are struggling with the prophets and the prophecies, I get it. I get it. Then let's look at the material evidence. Our global economy is in shambles, with countries around the world printing money like drunken sailors, driving up inflation and the debt ceiling. Our healthcare systems are in shambles. We have a lack of doctors, a lack of nurses, and the cost of accessing reliable care is actually becoming the least of our problems. Technology has pushed so far past hubris that we now believe that data breaches and privacy overreach is an acceptable cost to live in a digital age. Our trust in governments, big businesses, and institutions are at an all-time low. And you know what else is our own individual sense of significance, meaning, and purpose. The media and entertainment industries are putting out more crap content than ever before, and Hollywood can't seem to go more than about 2 or 3 days without a headline spotlighting the depravity and the deception that has been running rampant there for decades. And then there's religion and spirituality. We have mainstream religions supporting division within the community, and we have spiritual gurus tumbling from their ivory towers. As I've said before, and I will say again, if it feels like a lot, it is a lot. Every aspect of our world is going through a values shift. And I believe that the prophets and the prophecies have been trying to prepare us for this for a long time. Now, this can either leave you feeling completely ungrounded, naively optimistic, and holding on to this light and love narrative, but still unconsciously grappling with the cognitive dissonance of real problems that need to be solved. Or you might find yourself completely ensnared by this purely apocalyptic narrative, believing that everything is going to hell in a handbasket, actively searching for ways to get off the grid and learn how to homestead. I can say that I've been in both places. The prophets and the prophecies were one of a million things that brought me back into balance and helped me find a third way of being. Consciously living with one foot in two worlds. And I basically call this being an Apocaloptimist, which is a term that was actually coined by Sue Fitzmaurice. I am an Apocaloptimist. I know it's all going to shit, but I still think it will turn out okay. Thanks for joining me for this initial conversation designed to share ideas and insights from the prophets and prophecies to consider the pure potential that we are living through age-changing times in order to co-create something new. Like any good tour guide, I aimed to give you some of the highlights from my own exploration so you can get a sense from where you might want to do a little bit more investigation. One thing became very clear to me as I contemplated the prophecy of the Hopi Elders, which was considering and understanding my own contribution, both in a business sense and beyond. And it's really what led me to decode the insights woven into my birth data, using modalities like human design, numerology, and astrology. You can find a link below to explore your soul driver's guide, which includes powerful insights into 4 drivers that move you at a soul level, drawn straight from your numerology, your astrology, and your human design. Until next time, I'm Trish Murray, casting a vision for this new age, for soul seekers navigating a rapidly changing social, economic, political, business, and spiritual landscape, one podcast at a time.